Right. So good morning and hello. If you don't know me, my name is Scott Brandwine. I'm the Bibliographic Services Manager at SWAN. And thank you for coming to this session on diversity audits, sharing, and panel discussion. Before we dive in, I have a few things to go over. First, I just basically wanted to tell you the sort of genesis of this event. Basically, SWAN has a task force to address diversity concerns in our metadata. And aside from doing some work looking at subject headings, when we first started meeting, we decided that we wanted to also look into just the idea of diversity audits, which seem to be something that a lot of libraries have been thinking about or doing and sort of starting on their own. And there were a lot of questions, and there was a lot of people seem to be kind of home growing their own plans and projects, and it seemed best for us to learn about what our libraries need from us, and also for you yourselves to just start putting our heads together and talking about this topic and learning from each other. So while, yes, I mean, one of the main purpose for me of this is to sort of learn what we at SWAN can do for our SWAN members. It's also just an excellent opportunity for us to learn from each other. So a couple of things. I put in a link to the library learning event if you want an agenda of your very own. I'm going to go ahead and show you that. I've never actually used this feature before. So you should be seeing my screen. If you're on the event page and scroll all the way to the bottom here, you will have a little download link for the diversity audit panel agenda, which will give you this here. Which is, it's fairly bare bones because I really want this to be about the conversation. But just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing, I'm going to prattle on to you for a few more minutes, and then we'll turn to our panel to have them, and we'll introduce them, and they'll give a brief summary of the work they've done, be it a diversity project or a tool that's being worked on. And I've got some questions for them. We would love to hear questions from you, again, of course, from for our panelists. And that'll go on for a bit. At 10:30, I do want to break so we can stretch our legs and, you know, do all of that self-care that sitting in front of a computer requires. And then we'll reconvene, and for the last bit of it, we'll have another opportunity for more Q&A from the audience for our panelists, but I also have some leading questions for us, for you in the audience as well, so we can maybe hear some of your stories, some of your concerns, some of your ideas, which is kind of the whole point of this event. So the next page is just some questions that hopefully we'll get to cover during this event. This is certainly not everything that we can talk about, but it was just some ideas that the task force had put together. So I'm going to ditch this, and I'm going to show you one more thing. Actually, before we get started on that, just a couple housekeeping things. We can communicate in a couple of ways. GoToMeeting has just a couple of options. I will ask that everybody remain muted during the bulk of this unless you are speaking. There is a chat that you can feel free to put any questions in. If you have a question that's a bit complex, or just you would feel more comfortable speaking out loud, you can of course put a request in and just say, I'd like to ask a question out loud. And we can have you unmute and speak if you have that capability. And the other thing, we don't seem to have too many people with cameras on, but if there are too many cameras on, we can have a bit of what do you call, backup bandwidth issues. So if you're not speaking, maybe turn that off for the time being. So the first thing that I want to do, I'm seeing things in the chat about audio issues, and that maybe localized to just one person. Thank you. Let me know if there are any audio issues. I put together something kind of fun just to get started and get people interacting a little bit. So let me pull that up really quickly. I have a couple of polls. And I'm having an issue doing copy paste right now, so let me see if this works. Okay, I'm putting something in the chat. It's a little link to a poll website. If you could go ahead and click on that, there's no built-in capability in GoToMeeting itself. But if you have the ability, just go ahead and click on that. It's going to ask you for a username to create something. You don't have to do that. Just go ahead and click skip it. I just want to get some idea of who's here and what some of your experience has been. So I'll give you a second to do that, and then I'm going to go ahead and activate this, which I believe should open it up on your end. To answer this first question, which has your institution performed a diversity audit, whether you finished one or in the middle of one, if you're planning one in the near future, or if you have no plans yet and are just here to learn a little bit. And I'll wait for it to stop moving. And yeah, okay, good. So a lot of you are in the process of doing this work or want to do this work pretty soon. 8% have finished one, which is honestly more than I expected to see, so that's pretty neat. Good, so hopefully we can hear from some of you later on who are doing work in this arena already. The next question is about 2 vendor tools that are on my radar at least. And I'm just curious if anybody has any experience with them. So of course Ingram, Collection HQ, or none. Collection HQ did just launch last week. I know Ingram's been doing that work for a little bit longer. So, okay, mostly none. We're supposed to have a panelist here who is using the Ingram tool and unfortunately could not make it. So we have worked with that a little bit on my end. Claudia, one of the consultants on my team, worked with one of our libraries to put together those reports that they require. So we have a little insight into that. We've taken a look very, very briefly just this week at the Collection HQ tool. So we can chat about those if we want. And then the last question, I just want to know who you work for. You're either from a SWAN member library, a library that's not a member of SWAN, but from a different Illinois consortium, you're from a standalone, or you work for a consortium itself. These are locking really quickly. I'm not sure when that's happening, but yeah, as expected, most of you are SWAN members. But yeah, we do have a fair number from outside, which is really, really good to know. Yeah, thank you. That's basically all I wanted to know. So let me turn this off really quickly and get started. Our panelists are, I'm just going to go down the list really quickly before we dive in. We have Lizzie, Matkowski, and McGary from Downers Grove Public Library, who are doing collection audit work there. Katy Almendinger, early literacy librarian at Glen, Ellyn, is going to talk about their work. And Romano from Oak Lawn, Toonen from Naperville, and Rachel Fischer from the CCS consortium, who has been working on a neat little tool that we'll get to take a brief introductory look at. So first, I'm going to turn things over to, oh, I'm hearing you couldn't see the poll results. I'm very sorry about that. I thought I was sharing my screen at the time, but well, they're gone. I'm sorry, but it was mostly for my edification anyway. I'm going to turn things, oh, you did see them. Okay, great. I'm going to turn things over to Lizzie and Van at Downers Grove to give a brief summary of the work they've been doing. And we're going to go down the line and get summaries sort of from everybody, and then we'll open the door for questions. So Lizzie and Van, do you want to take it away?
Hello, I'm Lizzie Matkowski. I'm an Adult and Teen Services Manager at the Downers Grove Public Library. And this is Van. I want to introduce you.
Hi everyone, I'm McGary. I'm a librarian in the Adult and Teen Services Department.
And we have been working on an audit in our department since about 2019. So this started because, well, first of all, because our library has been committed to being a safe and welcoming place for everybody, and we felt it was important to examine our collections to evaluate how inclusive we are of a wide variety of points of view and representations and experiences. We are undergoing a pretty large equity, diversity, and inclusion initiative. It's a major focus for us right now. So we are planning to use what we learned from the audit to apply it to other library aspects, not just collections, but also displays, book discussions, and other programming. So that's kind of the goal. It started because a few staff members, including myself, were attending programs and professional development on the subject of audits, and brought it back to the library and thought it would incorporate and advance these initiatives and our goals pretty well. We have started with a smaller pilot, so just a few staff in my department have taken parts of their collections so far, and we're all in the middle of this, so it's not like we have conclusions and full examples of statistics and results, but we have all taken parts, well, the several of us that are working on it have taken parts of our collections and started working on audits with the goal of, as we go through this, we try to work out the questions that come up, the procedures that we think will work best, and develop best practices and procedures so that we can roll that out to the rest of the department. Also with us today is Allison Rennell, who's the head of the kids department here. Her department is doing their own audit. It's very similar to ours, but not exactly the same. So if she thinks of anything that kind of adds or answers anybody's questions, she's also happy to contribute to the discussion as well. She's off camera, but she's here, I swear.
I'm here.
And Joy Madison is here as well. She's back there. She is taking part in the pilot as well. Dave, you want to anything about, did I miss anything? It's kind of a summary.
Yeah, that's a good overview. As Lizzie said, we're in the middle of it right now. And so, as Lizzie said, a few of us are kind of piloting this initiative. And so we're really trying to figure out the best practices and creating a training pathway. So putting together the training documents and webinars and best practices, as well as putting it together a shared vocabulary for our staff so that we are all kind of approaching the audit the same way. And we'll get into the details of it later, but we're also kind of figuring out the best way to approach the audit as far as determining how much we're going to audit, because as Lizzie said, we kind of started in 2019. I started in 2020 with the audit, and it's not feasible as far as if you're going to be doing the audit yourself to look at every single item in the collection. And so we're looking at how the statistics of how much we should be looking at or auditing of a particular subsection of the collection. And so hopefully we'll be kind of wrapping up the piloting of the process pretty soon, the next few weeks, I would think.
Yes, so right now what we're working on is part of the teen fiction collection, part of the general fiction collection, and this is for adult and teen services only. And Joy has been working on auditing our book discussion selections for the last few years as a way to kind of expand on just a collection audit and broaden it into other areas of our services and readers advisory and programming.
And this is Allison. We are doing the J fiction collection in the kids department right now.
All right, I think that's
about the summary of it.
That's great. Thank you so much. And yeah, we will come back to you for a little more detail on some of those things. Next, we'll have Katy Almendinger introduce yourself. Katy, are you available?
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Good morning. I am Katy Almendinger, and I'm the Early Literacy Librarian at the Glen Public Library. And we started our diversity audit in the winter of 2019. So we were able to get our hands into it a little bit before our library closed in March. And we also started because our library director had heard about it at a conference she attended, and it aligned with a lot of our diversity, equity, and inclusion goals, which similarly to Downers Grove, that's a really large initiative for us right now. And it was also really good timing because I was taking over the responsibility of selecting for the picture book collection. And so it really allowed me to get kind of a really in-depth, hands-on kind of knowledge of what is in the picture book collection. So we started with an audit of every item on our picture book shelves. We started with the shelf list, and then that has expanded to a juvenile fiction, so our chapter book collection. And our adult department is also working on I believe it is a nonfiction audit. So it started kind of small, and it's gained in its scope over the course of our time with this project. And we're really excited to get some of that data from it. We aren't quite finished with it yet, but I can see, you know, my last few pages of shelf lists are coming. So I'm excited about that too. And I think that's a good introduction to my diversity audit.
Great, thanks so much. And now Ange Romano from Oak Lawn. Feel free to
Hey everyone.
Hello.
I'm here. I'm Ange. I am the fiction librarian, fiction selector for the most part, though I do have some help. The team librarian here and her name is Isabel. Isabel and I had been dancing around the idea of diversity audits for a while. But when we had to stay home for the pandemic, we decided it was a good project to work on from home, actually, because you don't necessarily need to have the book in your hand to find out a lot of information about it. So it took a long time to like sort of figure out the template and figure out what we wanted to do with it. We're definitely in a beta / pilot phase of it for sure. We have, I think there's 3 active audits going on, one in science fiction, one in romance, which is less active, and then I think Isabel's got one going on in young adult fiction. And that's where we are. We're still working on figuring out what's the best practices for us, still working on, is this a thing that we can get done in a reasonable amount of time, or do we need to limit our scope? So that's kind of where we're at right now, is just sort of figuring out, you know, what works best and how do we make this work for us.
Great, sorry, thank you. Hi, I am both taking notes and rushing to get to my mute button, so I apologize for the little silence there. Thank you. And next, Karen, you're already on camera. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Karen Toonen. I'm the Collection Services Manager at Naperville Public Library. Naperville did its first collection audit in 2017. I was still in adult services. It was part of our strategic planning. In year 2, we had 2 different strategic groups, one that was looking at our non-users and one that was looking at our underserved populations. In year 3, our diversity audit really grew out of those previous discussions, trying to figure out why we had pockets of people who weren't using the library and how we could reach out to the underserved communities as well. So we did our audit. Our collection is roughly 570,000 items, and we were also we were in 3 buildings. We were going through renovation at all 3 buildings, so we had massive weeding going on at the same time. So we decided to audit our ordering instead of auditing our entire collection. And then just because of the sheer size, we also did a sampling technique. Fast forward, and in 2021, we had a new executive director. A lot of people in leadership team were changed, and we are doing our second audit. They've finished collecting the data, but they haven't turned in the report yet. I have only been tangentially working with that group. Again, we used a sampling technique. They came up with more collections that they looked at this time than previously. The outcome of the first one was really to establish a baseline. The determination was that we weren't serving our community and representing our community as well as we wanted. So this is a follow-up to see if the changes that we implemented helped. I'm involved in the second one because one of the changes recommended out of the first one and that we still need to implement is adding local subject headings for more access points into our catalog so that our diversity is easier to find, and potentially changing subject headings. So that's the aspect that I'm most connected with right now. That's all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen. And finally, Rachel Fischer from CCS, who's also already on camera. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm Rachel Fischer. I'm the Member Services Librarian at CCS. Can you make me a presenter so I can share my screen? Great, thank you. One moment. Today I'm going to speak on CCS's efforts to assist members with diversity audits by creating a data dashboard from the data in bibliographic and item records. So it's a bit complex to explain, so I've created a presentation so that you can see the slides to read while I speak. So we are still in the process of creating the data dashboard, but it is at a good point to demonstrate it and explain it at the moment. So after watching the prior Rails and Lacunae webinars on diversity audits, I became aware of how time-consuming the diversity audit process could be. Manually auditing a whole collection is impossible without the assistance of vendors, and many libraries don't have the funds to invest in such services. From watching those webinars, I came up with an idea that consortiums were capable of creating reports of the records with subject headings that meet specific criteria, and this data could be utilized to automate the diversity audit process by populating a data dashboard for the whole consortium. A dashboard depicting data from all libraries could then be utilized for benchmarking by comparing one library to the whole consortium or one library to another. It can also function as a collection development tool by allowing a user to eliminate all titles that a library owns, so a selector can choose diverse titles to purchase. The first step of the planning process was to identify what can be analyzed. So I needed to research the categories that are traditionally audited and compare them to the subject headings in order to plan for a manageable amount of categories within one graph. Geographic headings in the 650 subfield Z and 651 field proved to be the easiest field to begin with, since they are already categorized by continent on the Library of Congress's webpage. These subject headings are not just in nonfiction, but also in the records for fiction when a geographic region plays an important part in the story. So I then worked with our system administrator to identify specific Library of Congress subject headings and categorize them by the broad categories of BIPOC, disabilities / neurodiversity, and LGBTQIA+. And we created a prototype with just 3 categories so far, but we do plan on also adding in world religions and the narrower categories like specific ethnicities in the future. So at the moment, a data dashboard on author characteristics will be difficult to create because this information is rarely in records. The 386 field of the MARC record can be utilized for this information and then populate a dashboard. However, we do need to add that information to the records first because it's rarely used. So I do plan to experiment with both adding the field to records from diversity audit spreadsheets of individual libraries. However, this will only allow for a sample of records to be audited for author characteristics and not a whole collection. One thing that is difficult is that the dashboard does have some obvious limits. So one is that there are only certain types of records that do not have enough subject headings to analyze. So e-content records and on-order records tend to be lower quality. Many of these records do not have enough subject headings yet, so these cannot be included in the data set. So while I was working on the plans for the design, our system administrator, Bob Barth, handled the technical requirements. He researched the data dashboard software by testing out Google Data Studio and Tableau. Google's Data Studio was chosen because it is free and user-friendly. He also constructed the data dashboard. However, it does also have a limit of about 2 million records, although for fiction dashboard, there is more than that, and it's still functioning. However, this could be a problem for larger consortiums than CCS, because they would obviously have more than 2 million records per dashboard. He then created the SQL queries and constructed the queries in a way that they would be automatically run every month and then automatically upload to Google Data Studio. So once it's created, it does not need a lot of maintenance. So we do plan to do some user testing to ensure that the dashboard is usable. And then we'll spend more time on reviewing the subject headings, make sure we've found all of them, identified them, and categorized them, and then add in narrower categories. We also do plan, as I said, to add world religions and experiment with the author characteristics in the future. 1 second, I'm going to switch to the dashboard. So this is our data dashboard in Google Studio. Because of the record limit, we have had to create separate pages for the fiction, nonfiction, and multimedia collections. And then we've split them into 2 categories so far. So we have one for the geographic headings, which is categorized by continent, and then one for subject matter, which has the categories of BIPOC, disabilities / neurodiversity, and LGBTQIA+. So on the side, we have our filters. The majority of the filters are from the item record, so the first available date by the year, the assigned branch, the collection of adult, teen, and youth. Material type is from the item record. The statistical code is for the Dewey, decades, and genres. So if you wanted to just audit the youth mystery collection, you would be able to do that. We have a filter for the separate subject matters that we've categorized them as, and language from the bibliographic records. Exclude owning library is really neat. That's actually a regular expression, which can be a bit complex to use, but that allows the user to remove all of the titles from the data set that a specific library owns, and then they'd be able to look at our list of titles down here to select items that other libraries own that they would like to purchase. So going back up to the top, we have several different graphs and tables. So this first graph is the percentage of the selected collection. It calculates the percentage of items that fit into a specific category out of the total amount of items that the filters have isolated. The table below it is the same data but represented in numerical form with the record count and percentage. So next is the percentage of the topic within a collection graph, and this is a great graph if you would like to compare the different collections within the whole library. The table allows you to see the percentage within each category of the individual collections. And you can see if you need to focus more on one collection than another. And then below that, as I mentioned, is the title selected for analysis. So this includes every single title that's in the data set, the category of the subject, collection, the bibliographic record ID, so that you can create record sets or add the records to purchase orders, author title, publication year, the ISBN or UPC, the lifetime circulation count and item count. And it does only show a small amount on the screen, so you can click on these 3 dots and export the Excel file. So that is it.
Thank you. Wow, that is a very neat tool so far. I'm really excited to see where this goes. It's similar to you know what some of those vendors are attempting with their dashboards, but it seems to be a bit more tailored to the data that you've got, and it seems to take advantage of marked data that I think is largely possibly ignored in some of those other tools. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm caught on something. Great, thanks so much. I didn't get any questions in the chat for anyone yet, so feel free to start filling that in if you have anything for anybody. But I'm going to go ahead and start digging into a couple of things here. So the first question I have, I mean, a couple of you have given a little bit of insight into how you're selecting what demographics to audit for, and by demographics I mean, you know, diversity groups. I was hoping that somebody could give us a little more information about how you came to those choices in your particular library, whether it was patron outreach, demographic analysis, precedent from other libraries. Does anybody want to speak to that on our panel?
I can a little bit, Scott.
Mm-hmm.
For us, it was a combination of, I think, demographics and past practices that we saw in webinars and presentations. One of the things that we struggled very mightily with was how to represent our Arabic speakers in the library, because we have a very large population of Arabic speakers on the South Side, but as all of you know, they're not a monolith, and they don't even necessarily come from one part of the world. Some of them are African, some of them are from the Middle East, some of them are European at this point, so, and American as well. So we talked a lot about it, and I don't think we ever came up with a great solution, so that's something we're definitely interested in. But it was something that we talked about a lot, was how to include that group of people.
Kind of related to that, I'd like to add, in 2017, when we started this, we spent months trying to figure out the exact right things to collect data on before we started collecting data, long enough that the person actually in charge of leading the committee ended up leaving the library. And we then had 3 months to collect all of our data. So I would just caution everybody that the perfect is definitely the enemy of the good when it comes to doing collection audits, and it's better to get started, do it once, figure out what you did wrong, and then go back and do it again. So to kind of capture what Ian's just talking about, we collected ethnicity and nationality to try to make sure that we had ethnic representation from different areas, but then also that it wasn't all North America people. And then we were also trying to capture sexual orientation and gender. We were doing this for the characters in the book, but also for the authors. And then for children's books, be sure you also look at the illustrators. I think that's very important. The catch is when it comes to the authors and the illustrators, especially if you're having library staff do this, they will spend hours trying to figure out and go down the rabbit hole. And it's really not our business to out somebody or to try to dig that deep. So we basically set a time limit and said don't spend more than 5 minutes on any one thing. If you can't find it in 5 minutes, just don't include it. And I think it's important to set that time limit. And again, the perfect is the enemy of the good. If you sit there and analyze it to death, you just will never finish.
I can add my thoughts to this. So when I was deciding on the categories, I was really influenced by the recent Laconia webinars, and some of the presenters were speaking at that. And one thing I felt that was a bit different was looking at the geographic subject heading. And I felt that's data that should not be ignored and was really easy to automate. But one thing about automating the process is that there are certain details that librarians can manually catch that an automated diversity audit cannot catch. And I think a good point that someone mentioned to me was, for example, like a white South African, and if there was a biography on Elon Musk, who's a white South African, the diversity dashboard would not be able to pick that up. It would see you that the book is on a South African and categorize that as BIPOC without realizing it's a white person, unless it actually had the subject heading of Afrikaner in the record, and we'd be able to then know that that's there and exclude that from the data set automatically through the SQL queries. So there are some downsides to the audit. It does help speed it up greatly, but those are really minor cases where cultures are multicultural and headings can represent multicultural countries.
Hi, this is Allison from Downers Grove. I wanted to mention, I think all of us, we kind of came up with our areas based on previous webinars and what people are asking for, but I wanted to mention that for my J-Fiction audit, specifically for racial and ethnic diversity, we, based on something, one of the presentations I saw at PLA 2020, how Cedar Rapids, Iowa was doing their diversity audit for their teen fiction, is that they were using their demographics from their school districts so that then they could have a point between like what percentage of our school districts have people who identify of various racial or ethnic backgrounds to compare it to what their collection looked like. So we started doing that, but we came up, which has been helpful, but then also it's the state and the school districts don't have, you know, they have they have picked 5 main groups and then they lump everybody into other groups. So depending on how specific you want to get, kind of like what Ange was saying about her Arabic speakers, like you can miss people, and the way the school district, for example, for characters from like a Middle Eastern background gets in the school, that gets lumped under white. So then you lose that. So I just wanted to mention, like, we did use some comparison points, but we are going to be changing it in the future because we're kind of missing out on some stuff. So, but that was a way to, at least so that we had another data set to look at.
I would also recommend looking at your school district's language data, because they know how many families in their school district speak Spanish at home. They know how many families speak Arabic at home. And that information for us is super different than like our census data and our Glen Ellyn data. So that helps us kind of figure out more detailed information about what's actually happening in our school districts too.
Thank you. We have a question from Jason Katzian at Fox River Valley. It may be directed towards Karen, that you focused on auditing of orders rather than overall existing collection. And he's interested to hear more specifics on how libraries have implemented this type of front-end auditing.
So I can tell you in 2017, what we did was we took Q2 orders, which is basically the spring publishing push. And we looked at, in children's, picture book, beginning readers, chapter books. We did not look at board books because there's so many non-human characters in them. And then we looked at adult and teen fiction. And then what we did was we took all the orders that were done during Q2 and we took a 10% sample of them. If you want, I can share how large our data sets were.
Sure.
Oh.
You're a presenter
And then
now.
what we did, okay, give me just a sec. In sorry about that. I need to. Sorry, I had two screens up. So that was the size of our data sets. You can see all of our orders. In children's, you'll see that we didn't get to do all of the books, again, because there were so many non-human characters. We also went through and ordered a lot, or audited our programs and the titles associated with them. So we did all of our book clubs. For children's, we did all of our story times, and you can combine these two for the total number of items we did. And then this is the different characteristics we analyzed for. This is in the Laconia presentation that Rebecca shared earlier. And again, you can see that we weren't representing the diversity of our community, but we weren't surprised. And then when we came to 2021, we added ability and neurodiversity, and we added some areas. So we did easy fiction. Battle of the Books is a local program. We also added nonfiction. So the world religions and the folklore are mostly in children's, or where those collections continue to grow. Teen fiction, and then we added our cookbooks because that's one of our highest circulating collection. A biography is another really high circulating nonfiction collection, and then adult fiction. And again, the second time we did it, we took the orders from the spring push and the fall push. So it was Q2 and Q4, and we took 10% of each of those. I'm not sure if that answers Jason's question, but.
There's, excuse me, there's also a comment from Lizzie Bowden that I wanted to share. Just that she says we were fairly sure we were going to discover that our collection is lacking in diversity in most areas, so we decided to focus on new books and the future. We are only at the beginning, but happy to correspond more about it.
Yeah, and the same group that's doing our collection audit is also doing a weeding audit. So they're actually auditing what we're removing from the collection to make sure that we're capturing more of those older materials, like Lizzie mentions, and not weeding too many of the new materials that we've just added. And a third part they're doing is a display audit, so that then we are sure that we're getting those books on display, which makes them more visible, which will get them to CERC.
I was going to ask you about that, the discard audit. You were auditing, was that an audit of things that had been discarded in the past, or that as they were being discarded, you were auditing them?
They were going to do it as they had discarded it. I do not think they have collected that data yet. They just finished auditing the orders.
Okay. One other thing regarding front loading, I'm not sure if this is 100% relevant, but I was going to bring it up later. I know that we have a couple people from Oak Lawn Public Library on the call, and I just wanted to show a quick thing. Oh, she just messaged me. Yes, would I like to show the Oak Park Public Library document? Because there is something that they are doing here at SWAN that maybe they could speak to that might qualify as front loading. Oh, and I haven't shared my screen yet. Let me just do that. So this is a document that Oak Lawn has put together using one of our SWAN, some item data in SWAN that they've sort of put together a customized vocabulary. Does one of you want to speak to that? I know Barbara's on the call as well.
Yeah, I guess, Colleen, are you leaving that to me? This is Oak Park, not Oak Lawn.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Yes.
That's okay. We started doing diversity audits and in 2018, and we enjoyed doing it. At the time, I was a selector for all the fiction, and it was impossible to do a diversity audit of everything. We had a big collection. I'm like, how would I do that? So we started talking about a controlled vocabulary, and in 2020, we now use a diversity tag when applicable in all of our orders. So when we place an order, we put a tag in, and then we put it in the Cat 4 in workflows, and so that we have the ability to track all this. And then we use Blue Cloud to run reports to take a look at things. So that's what we're doing, and we went with the bigger umbrella terms of BIPOC, disability, LGBTQ, and intersectional when it's really intersectional, I guess is what I want to say. And we look at author, we look at subject, and then we look at when it is author, subject, illustrator, character. You know, we're meshing it up depending on whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And we're doing that. We are a centralized selection. So we have 4 people doing this. We have 4 people who are selecting, a lot of conversations around this, and we just do it for everything we're ordering. And then we've gone and used some of the Kirkus reviews to do some reverse audits using the same tagging. And then we keep just trying to add as much as we can when we can. And then taking a look. I mean, we're not doing this, I should say, for any statistical number. We're not looking for a number. We're trying to be as diverse and inclusive and bring in as many marginalized voices as we can. And we're just going to continue adding and using this method as we had a baseline in 2018, and then we want to see growth every year if we can.
Great. Thanks. Yeah. So, and just to give a little bit of information about how this works, this is, of course, item data, and as you said, about controlled vocabulary. It is also item data that is sort of staff side only. The way that this particular data point works in our system is that there's a number of libraries who use it in a different way. So, of course, Oak Park is using diversity data, but there's also genre data in this vocabulary. There's it's sort of a hodgepodge. So everybody has their own kind of method to it. So it's not something that we can really bring to the catalog for searching or anything like that. So yeah, that's just a little more information. So if you are in a SWAN library, this is something that does exist, and something that we could potentially expand upon if you wanted to get into the game of kind of again front loading this work. So thank you for that. Let me unshare really quick. I'm going to go back to our chat. Okay, so actually Adrienne just asked something that I wanted to touch on. Are any of your libraries including author identifiers in addition to diversity subject headings? For example, BIPOC author, neurodiverse author. If so, are you putting that in the bib records or authority records?
So that was a recommendation we had from 2017, but we didn't have the political will and tech services to do it at the time. Since I am now the manager of collection services, we will be doing that. I learned about the 385 fields basically at ALA and have talked with our cataloger about using those or using local subject headings. So that's our next step after we basically expand the controlled language of the Library of Congress subject headings, either with local subject headings or potentially in the future replace it entirely.
Yeah, this is an area that I'm particularly interested in, and it has come up as well in the SWAN task force. The idea of including that data does present just one logistical issue, though, and of course that if you start including it, the more you get in there, the more of an expectation there is that that data is complete, which is a tall order. So you know, it's just the hurdle may be identifying the fact that if a thing is not identified in an audit as that relies on that data as being authored by, illustrated by somebody from one of these groups, that doesn't necessarily mean it wasn't. It just means we didn't have the data for it. So it's a little tough there. So in some sense, the better you get at it, the more careful you have to be. But yeah.
And my department isn't big enough for us to do everything, so we're working on a workflow where all the adult services and children's services staff can feed us that information, and then we can load it into our catalog. Naperville has the advantage of being standalone, so we can control our subject headings more than people in consortiums.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Adrian's follow-up, if you're adding that to bib records, how are you managing to make sure the author identifier is in all bib records? And that is the difficulty there. I would say that there's potential through, if you're keeping a local authority file, some of that stuff could be sourced from an authority file and automated, but that would be quite a job of work automation-wise. So yeah, that's a tough question that I don't know that we have the answer to yet. There is a lot of potential for crowdsourcing this information too. That is, you know, if we are, since we are in a consortium, we do have the ability, if there is a number of staff who are interested in this project, you know, it only takes one to populate that data, and then it's there on the record, which can be helpful. There were a couple of comments throughout this about works with what's the word I'm trying to say? Non-human characters you were talking about, and there's also sort of the idea of materials that sort of imply things, but don't necessarily explicitly represent a diverse group necessarily. And your staff probably came across this with the sci-fi audit, I'd imagine, because that's. So I was wondering how people were addressing that, and if there was any leeway that anybody was taking to include things that are maybe not explicitly diverse, but still speak to diverse themes.
That's a really good question. The books I think of when I think of this for sci-fi are, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Becky Chambers, but she writes really amazing space opera where many of the characters are non-human, but they are representing pretty interesting sexualities and interesting gender issues. And so it is, I don't think we've come up with an answer that works 100%, but we're trying, I think, to say that those books are, LGBTQIA plus friendly, because they are, even if the characters exploring their sexualities and genders aren't human. I don't know how much that would apply to board books necessarily, but I do think for science fiction, it's an interesting question. Again, I don't think we have a final answer yet. It's definitely something we're going to need to talk about some more.
So this is something that comes up in picture books all the time. Because we're working with kids, a crayon can carry all of this meaning for kids, and it's not just a red crayon. It could be somebody who has LGBTQ representation. It can be somebody who is an imaginary friend but has all these other life circumstances that are affecting them, like poverty and things like that. And so in our audit, we have a category to mark that they're non-human, and we also have categories to mark some of those other things that non-human character is representing. So we're capturing all of that data for that book, because for kids, you know, a monster isn't just a monster, a crayon isn't just a crayon. And then we also have a pretty robust notes field that can capture some of those other things that our spreadsheet doesn't capture.
Okay. Yeah, this is something that I don't personally I haven't performed a diversity audit at any institution, but I do volunteer at a LGBT library and archives where I catalog for them. And part of the cataloging process is making the decision, does this belong in our collection? And that crayon book came across my desk about a year and a half ago. And we made the decision to keep it because it was mentioned in, I forget what publication, or some sort of GLAD award or something, this, that, and the other. And that can be sort of a helpful tool as well. If an organization recognizes a publication, then I mean you can give sort of deference to their take on it. The GLAD Awards, the Lambda Literary Association has been really helpful for us in that regard. And also we tend to keep more children's materials that fit that sort of than adult materials that fit this, just because our children's collection is relatively small. So sort of the idea that we'll take what we can get, you know, might sort of skew that a little bit for us. So just a little comment there. Excuse me. What do I want to ask next? You know, I had all these questions laid out in order, and then I went out of order as soon as I started, of course. I want to ask if it seems like a lot of what we talked about is fiction, and I want to see what kind of the challenges are in evaluating fiction versus evaluating nonfiction. There is sort of a perspective shift between the two, and I want to know from anyone who's done both, maybe what they can speak to in that regard.
I can speak to that from the point of automating the process. That's one of the benefits of automating it so that it identifies the subject heading, is that it really isn't distinguishing between topics and like the details of the topics. It's really just looking at the subject heading as it is. So while there can be like a lot of extra details in a summary or as you read it that could lead to like ambiguous understanding of the topic, like crayon, it really is just looking at the subject headings. So if crayon does not have the correct subject headings in it, then it's not going to be categorized in an automated diversity audit for what it should represent. So it really is very subject heading dependent. And another example that I found recently was a record for a fairly new book that was published by A.M. Strickland called In the Ravenous Dark, in which there was no indication that it was an LGBTQ topic in the record. It wasn't in the summary, it wasn't in the title, but the Goodreads.com page had the information that it was about a pansexual character. So if a librarian doesn't read that and manually study that to audit it, it's not necessarily going to be in the records. So some of the limitations of auditing via the automated process that could be problematic, again, in relation to what you would notice if you actually did it manually and read through the summary in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. That Goodreads reference. That's an excellent source for, because you just get people talking about something. People who have actually read something and engaged with it already are having conversations about it, and they're tagging it as well. There's you know, they can put it into collections and shelves. So I've noticed that doing my work at this library that I told you about, and sometimes I'll be shocked when I go to a Goodreads page and see that something's LGBTQ tagged, when it's like there's no indicator on the book at all that there would be content like that. So that's been super helpful. I do want to break, but I also missed a question in the, oh, sorry, were you going to speak again, Rachel? You want me to?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry. There's one question that I missed in the chat that I wanted to make sure we got from Carrie at Itasca. For all panelists, if your community is primarily white, would you do an audit based on US demographics, or would you stick with your community's demographics?
I can talk about that a little bit if you'd like. We kind of looked at our demographics in the census, you know, for the nation, for the community. And then what else did you look at, Van? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so we also for the state, and so that gave us, you know,
it gave us an idea, like a very basic idea, but we are not planning on using it as like a goal, maybe as like a baseline. But for us, we think it's just as important to represent diverse, you know, perspectives and experiences, independent of whether or not that's represented in our community. You know, there's the windows and doors concepts that we think are just as important as representing, making sure that we're like hitting a percentage of what's in our community. Does that, you think that's, that's fair to say?
So we also pulled some data from Mental Health America, as well as the Williams Institute for some statistics on what we could find on LGBTQIA plus identifying individuals. And so our community, just to give you an idea, in Downers Grove is approximately 88% white, over 90% able-bodied, majority heteronormative cisgender, et cetera. And so, you know, we aren't going to use this data to establish any sort of goal for our collection, because, you know, we do have the materials to reflect those voices already. We want to make sure that we provide a collection that also provides a window or opportunity for our community to have be able to get views or be able to learn and hear from voices and experiences from other groups as well. And so, as Lizzie said, that we did look at these census numbers and other data, but we're really not going to be using those as a benchmark or goal setting at all for our audit purposes. I don't know if you want to add.
Do you want to add to? The question was about demographics and what you're looking at and how, but you already kind of talked about that with the kids.
We're using the school district sort of as a comparison point, but I think that's going to be more applicable in our future ordering than of our collection as a whole, because it yeah, similar to what you guys said.
Thanks. And one more question popped in. So before we break, it's directed towards Rachel. How does the automated audit account for things like white authors writing about Native American tribes and history? Would this count as a diverse book because it is about a BIPOC topic, or not diverse because it was written by someone who's not a member of the BIPOC community?
Right now, the dashboard only includes the subject headings in the records in the data set and has no author information. So that's not something that we can audit until we get more information about the authors. So I will be taking some more time to experiment with like what information is in the authority records, if there's a way to add it from the authority records and bulk add it into 386 fields so that we would be able to do an author audit, but that's going to be very time consuming. We would also need to potentially get the diversity audit spreadsheets from libraries that have done diversity audits and could bulk add that information. If we do, when we do that, it won't be a full audit of the collection. It would really just like represent a sample, and there could be a lot of information missing. So it would not be like as accurate as the subject heading audit would be of just the subject of the book.
Mm-hmm. I suppose if in like an ideal universe where that author data were absolutely 100% populated, you could set up a method to compare the subjects and the authors. If there's like a match between the identities of the two, you know, it could be considered somehow, I don't know, something. But yeah, without that data, it's really impossible. I do want to break. I need to stand up and stretch. We are at 10:37. And maybe we can come back and reconvene at 10:47. Sound good? Thank you so much for everything so far. This has been great. Hi, everyone. Hopefully everyone's back, or at least on their way back from their various kitchens and break rooms. I was sort of planning a couple of things for the second half of this, but I actually like the way the conversation's been going, so I'm kind of hesitant to interrupt it. So I think I might take a different tack for the second half than I was planning. First of all, there have been a couple of questions that I've gotten privately about whether this was recorded, and it is, so it will be available if you want to catch up or share it with your staff, or hear the first half that you may have missed. So what I want to do next is sort of turn things over to the group at large as well. But first, before we do that, I just want to make sure there weren't any more pressing questions for our panelists. I didn't get anything in the chat during the break, but this is the time if you have anything. And I will say that Karen needs to back out in about 7 minutes. So if you have a specific question for Karen, don't miss your opportunity. Ooh, excuse me. Nothing yet. Okay, that's fine. If anything does come up, feel free to go ahead and ask. We can always turn the attention back to our panelists. So I would like to hear from the other folk in here as well. Basically, what I want to know from you is whether anybody wants to share their experience with any audit work that they've done. So I suppose my first question is whether anyone in here has performed an audit and done anything very differently from what we've been hearing so far. Any of your methods or goals, do they tend to, have they, well, again, I say been different from what we've heard so far? Oh, thanks, Karen. Karen shared your email in the chat if you want to do some follow-up. Right. So, any stories to share from the crowd? I have some other questions as well.
This is Violet from Palatine. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can.
I wouldn't say we're doing anything drastically different. We started in January. We created a team of 3 of us, from one youth services, one adult services, and I'm collection services. And we are doing I curate from Ingram as well, and then we're doing around 1,700 items that staff have shared up the lists, and we did randomized lists of specific parts of the collection. And so we're going to analyze those in a little more granular fashion, and then compare that data with what we get from Ingram. So we'll have kind of a different perspective from those 2 data sets. We've given ourselves the time period of till the end of this year to complete our audit. It is pretty time consuming. And then we've been working with Rachel. We're in CCS, so we've been working with Rachel on trying to figure out how we're going to do the subject headings in the future. Once we do this audit, we're going to then apply these diversity points and have the selectors identify that when they're ordering so that we can add that information in. Then we'll redo the audit, both parts of it, Ingram, and do again an audit of the same number of items in 3 years-ish, in around 3 years, to see where we've gone from there, so that we can have a comparison of our starting point to hopefully good improvement on that. And also recognizing the fact that it isn't just about the collection, and it's, you know, that diversity in programming, all those different aspects, diversity in staff, all are interlinking. And just trying to think of something. But anyway, so that's, you know, basically where we're at with it right now. Is we're kind of in the process, and I haven't gotten the data back from Ingram yet, but I have sent them our ISBN list. So it's ticking along pretty well.
Mm-hmm. Oh, excuse me. Ooh, sorry. The Ingram program. So the ISBN list you sent them, was that a complete list, or was that? Did you have to edit that down for them in any way?
Right. You don't use world language materials. It's only English language materials, which kind of makes sense. And it's only regular print, so you don't use large print. But trying to think if there's, and it's print only. They don't audit audiobooks or anything like that. Okay. And then the only other stipulation was you can pay for different levels. Like you can do just your adult collection, you can do just teen or kids. You get a bit of a discount if you do all three, and we are doing all three. So we're doing adult, teen, and kids. But other than those sort of format stipulations, it is every ISBN in the collection, fiction and non. So it's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear back from our library that used that as well. But again, I don't have much information on what those results look like yet. It seems like we're in the same place, or excuse me, I should say they're in the same place as you are, process-wise. Thanks for that. Another question came up in the chat that I wanted to make sure was addressed, and I just lost it. For those not using demographic data to set targets, how do you determine when a diversity aspect has an acceptable level of representation in your collection? That's an excellent question. Anybody want to speak to that, how you know what that benchmark is?
We can try and address that, since we talked about it first. We don't really have, we don't really see ourselves setting an acceptable level. Like maybe if we see something's really lacking, we might say, let's at least try and get to the community demographic level. But overall, this is kind of a process in our EDI journey as a library to establish, you know, ongoing reflection on what are our ordering practices, what is our collection makeup, how reflective are we of differing voices and experiences, and not necessarily like, well, we've done it. Like, we're never going to be done. It's never going to be like, okay, we have enough. So I'd say that's where
the needle's always moving about how much percentage, you know, like the demographics are a good place to start, but I mean, if we go over that, isn't that great too? And then we also talked about how our collections are so large that it would take such a long, that's why our next step is to, you know, we're starting to audit our ordering as well, to make sure that our ordering have, you know, has a strong percentage of diverse characters and different voices, because when you have a collection as big as ours, it's going to, you know, moving from 6% to 7% is going to take a long time. So we want to make sure everything new we're bringing in is going to be, you know, different voices and different types of authors and things like that. So it's a kind of about trying to sort of changing our perspective and being aware of what we have and where we can do better.
Yeah, where are we getting our ordering? Like, are there other places we can look that we've been ignoring? How can we expand our scope? How can we better promote the items in our collections that, you know, we may order and linger? Like, why are they lingering? What are we promoting instead? And what are our priorities there? Anything?
Yeah, so I think we had discussed, we have around 300,000 items in our collection,
We think
something like that, probably more. And
I can never remember.
so
I've been told, I don't.
as we all know, you know, there's a lot of challenges with the
Like
publishing
260.
industry.
Sorry, that was it. 200
Right.
physical item.
Pretty large collection, and as we all know, there's a lot of challenges with the publishing industry. You know, there's been some improvements, but there's still a long ways to go. And so for every, you know, 10 plus James Patterson titles that we purchase, and there's many titles that come out all the time, you know, we have to, there's a huge uphill battle climb to try to get, you know, more diverse titles, because with the audit, you have to take into account those multiple copies that you purchase. And so with these non-diverse titles, those multiple copies, you're buying so many of those because they're, you know, popular and in demand, and there's holds, etc. for them. And then you buy these diverse titles, you have to get that needle to shift, like Allison was saying, it takes a very long time. And so with the diversity audit, we're kind of getting an idea of where we're at, but there isn't going to be this dramatic shift all of a sudden. It's going to take a very long time. And, you know, we're working on it, and hopefully we'll see the improvement, but it's not going to be a fast process.
That sort of dovetails nicely into something I did want to address during the session as well, which is resources. And you mentioned possibly needing to reach out to other avenues of obtaining materials to fulfill these gaps in the collection. And I wanted to ask if anybody had any success or struggles in particular with that process and finding materials in the first place, and what you've done. No one?
I can add something from the perspective of the data dashboard. So one of the benefits of using the automated process is that we hope it can be used for a collection development tool in the future. The libraries can, and in response to the benchmarking question too, the libraries can benchmark against a different library. So a less diverse community or a smaller library could choose to not just benchmark against a whole consortium, but if they know that Palatine has already done a diversity audit and is working on it, or Evanston has already done it, or Zion Benton is potentially more diverse of a collection, then they could choose to just benchmark against certain libraries. They can choose to look at their collections based on specific topics and see if in past years of purchasing that they could purchase from that list.
Yeah, I like that. It seems like we're also talking, you also mentioned just sort of benchmarking against each other. And that seems to be something that is being pushed in some of these tools. I saw a sample data set or result set from that Ingram iCurate program, and it was basically giving the bar graphs of the library's collection against their, I guess, public libraries, quote unquote, you know, clients in general. So, Katy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, so I think for Glen Ellyn, we are trying to look for a diverse vendor pool, but we also are relying less and less on professional reviews to buy some of these diverse materials, because they don't always make it in School Library Journal. They don't always make it in Kirkus and things like that. So we aren't as heavily relying on professional reviews to guide our purchasing, because it's allowing us to purchase more broadly, and it's allowing us to fill our gaps a little bit more easily.
I understand that Kirkus has been dipping their toe into the diversity waters in a bit. I don't know much about that, but I do know that that data that they're gathering is part of what's fueling the Collection HQ diversity tool that launched just last week. Has anyone used Kirkus to identify items, or any experience with that? I just don't know a lot about it.
I mean, as far as I understand with the Kirkus tool is that it's mostly in Baker and Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
And so they create Kirkus lists of all kinds of topics, and those are in Baker and Taylor, but I don't order fiction in Baker and Taylor, so I can't say I use it, but that's where I understand the list to be.
Okay.
I also will add that Kirkus is more and more trying to call out race and representation in their reviews. So it will say something like, main character presents as so-and-so presents as this. So they're trying to include it in their published reviews, which is really helpful. And I can't remember if Booklist was also moving in that direction as well. I'm not sure, but Kirkus is doing it for sure.
Nice. Okay. Oh, so thanks. Don shared a link to Kirkus Reviews, possibly diversity portal, in the chat.
I was just can I just quick piggyback on something Katy said, which is not using professional reviews as much. I have found that is for something like romance. I mean, I don't think I use it hardly at all anymore, because there's very little that's getting professional reviews, and what is often not at all meeting any diversity standards I have. I'm specifically trying to grow our LGBTQIA romance collection, and it's gotten a little easier as major publishers have started, dipping their toes into that water, but so many of those titles from smaller publishers aren't reviewed ever. And so even though, Broadout or Baker and Taylor is selling them, they just don't have any reviews. And so I've had to really just say, I can't depend on this for romance. I just can't.
Yeah, the romance genre is a tough one. I deal with that a lot, again, at this library that I work at on the weekends, and it's half of that, the stuff that we get could be 5-10 years old and has never even been cataloged. I mean, yeah, so reviewing is definitely out of the question. This stuff is definitely underrepresented on shelves. Oops. So Dawn threw a question into the chat that a couple people have addressed, but just a sort of logistical question. Do libraries audit based on copies or titles, or are you looking at both? Rachel, can I ask you, that's showing bibliographic records, or is that the counts there, is that based on copies in your tool?
The count is based on the number of item records.
Oh, it is, okay.
And that's used to calculate the percentage.
Excellent. Anyone else want to just give a quick copies versus titles answer?
We're using titles because in the youth department, especially for things like the Monarch and the Blue Stem Awards, those lists tend to be very heavily populated with diverse representation, but we also buy like 20 copies of them because they're in heavy demand in our community. But we count that as one item. So we're going by item and not copies.
Okay. And just for the sake of those who are listening to this and not seeing the chat, Angela doesn't really have an answer to that because they're mostly looking at collection where they don't purchase multiple copies. Barb at Oak Park says we're looking at both copy and title. The numbers are based on copies because that's what the reporting tool provides. And they also matter in the selection process. And Downers Grove, we are working from a shelf list, so we're looking at titles while taking into account multiple copies, which affects the percentage breakdowns of one collection. So I have a question from Stephanie at Roselle. What sort of non-traditional methods is anyone using to find diverse books, specifically children's books? Which, yeah, sort of speaks to what I was asking before. Any more insight into that?
I do. Mine is adults, and I see David is looking for that. I have a list of book blogs and book websites that I go to. You know, there's a couple websites that specifically deal with LGBTQ romance, and I go to those. There's, I think Scott mentioned Lambda Literary. They have a list of, you know, prize-winning books that have LGBTQIA subjects. Book Twitter is a good place. Something like Early Word, I think is trying to really get out there and get titles onto the scene. Some of them are big, but some of them aren't. But yeah, the book internet is my friend. Things like LitHub, things like I'm trying to think of what other websites I go to. Electric Literature, BuzzFeed Books sometimes has lists that you wouldn't expect. So all different kinds of book websites that aren't necessarily librarian based in any way.
Thanks. A couple things in the notes about that. Excuse me, the comments. Oh, and the same question. David had the same question as Stephanie for adult as well as children's materials. Emily says, I follow a lot of children's authors and publishers on Twitter and Instagram, and I found a lot of titles this way. Yeah, highly recommend selectors start looking at social media, Bookstagram, BookTok, and BookTube. They just throw a book in front of any of those services, don't they? And yeah, publishers. Karina adores is an LGBTQ plus romance. And Colleen asks, Ange, are you then purchasing through Amazon?
Yes, we can. That's definitely an option that we have. But sometimes those things are available through B&T. Every once in a while, something will be available. But yes, we do use Amazon, especially for self-pub. We will use Amazon. Self-pub romance is an area where I just happen to read a lot. So I discover a lot that way. But yeah, we will purchase through Amazon.
I actually got a question to me just now in private that I'm going to go ahead and share. Somebody asked what the LGBTQ library I volunteer for is. And it's the Gerber Hart Library and Archives up in Rogers Park on Clark Street. It's a completely volunteer based, and our collection is collected strictly through donations. It's a pretty neat little organization that has absolutely no money at all. So yeah, and feel free to email me if you want to know more about that. Right, sorry, that was a little side note. I just lost my train of thought. Why don't we go into, so it seems to me, based on actually the conversation we're having right now, is that it might be helpful for us to sort of pool our resources in terms of, you know, finding recommendations and all of that. So it seems like it might be useful to have some sort of portal put together, either SWAN-wide, possibly Rails-wide, where we can just sort of list things that have been helpful for each other. So hopefully maybe that's something we can get in the works. This is a very broad and open-ended question, but does anybody, based on what you've been hearing here, what could, you know, a lot of you are from SWAN, what could SWAN be doing for you? Or perhaps we can talk about just what could any organization be doing for you? If we, you know, Rails isn't really here, but we can make a wish list anyway to make this process easier. In a perfect world, I mean, you're pie in the sky requests and wishes. Any thoughts on that? Nothing. Well, resource list is one thing that crossed my mind. Finding a way to collectively enhance our metadata. It sounds like, especially regarding author information, might be something to look towards. Possibly local subject vocabulary might be useful, just to sort of rattle off some ideas. Anything else? I'm really nervous. All of my video feeds for the three of you are you sitting very still? Okay, you've moved. Thank you. I thought maybe I got cut off.
It's too broad of a question to measure.
I know.
In like
Okay.
7,000 directions.
That's
But I know that there are, and this could just be that I don't know that they exist, but a networking group or something that's like specific to diversity audits and diversity audit work would be really helpful. There are broader DEI networking groups that tend to go in very different directions, but because this diversity audit work has very specific questions and very specific things that we're looking for, this has been so helpful that I feel like something like a listserv or a group or something would be much appreciated. And if one exists, please let me know because I'll be joining it.
okay, cool. Yeah, I don't know of anything locally at the moment, but that's definitely something we can start talking about. We've got in the chat, like you said, compiling resources, creating the dashboards full of detailed info would be lovely. Stephanie says for libraries in the process of starting a diversity audit, maybe some documentation examples of starting points. Amy Pretchell says, I'd like to know, pie in the sky, what facets everyone doing the audits would like to be searchable in the catalog? That's a question. So we've talked about sort of the staff end of having access to author data, of course, subject data, illustrator data, character data. To what extent would that also be something we'd want to have in our catalog for the patrons to use, if that's possible? Thoughts on that? Does it sound dangerous to anybody? Too difficult to maintain? I mean, I have thoughts, but
I put it in the chat, this Violet from Palatine again, but intersectionality and own voices were two that would be really helpful.
What do you mean by that?
Like to be able to identify intersectionality as a point of diversity, and then also to be able to identify own voices.
I see. Okay. In a catalog, okay. And you mean that for auditing purposes or for patron purposes, or I suppose both could be?
Right. We're auditing for those points of diversity in what we're doing currently, but then we would love that to be searchable too, for staff to be able to identify, book lists, and for educators and just the general public as well.
Okay. Dan, as you popped your camera on, were you going to share something?
Yes, so we just wanted to add a few things. So we were also auditing for own voices up until last month, actually. We need diverse voices, we need diverse books, recently released a statement last month announcing that they would stop using that term, own voices, because it has become very problematic over the years, creating some harmful situations for authors to feel forced or be coerced into revealing information about themselves that they did not want to or did not feel comfortable. And so we need diverse books is no longer using that term. Novelist has also released a statement saying that they are reviewing it and are looking at their identity headings. And so at our library, we've chosen to no longer use that term, own voices, as well. And so we are really looking at our sources of for author identification information when we're auditing, and we're trying to be really mindful about how authors choose to identify, and we're really looking at making sure that when we are auditing for that information about authors, that it is the author identifying themselves. And we just want to try to raise some awareness about the issues around own voices. And I don't know if there's anything else anyone wants to add. We can add some of the resources. There's a lot of articles that have been published surrounding the issues and the problems with this term and its usage. It's become weaponized over the years in the publishing industry, and as well as social media, especially. And
we've been really grappling with how to, I don't know, what to do if we're not using own voices. It's kind of not a replacement, but like how to get to that without using, so it's
we recognize that it has been useful, and there are you know, the positives of it, but the negatives that and the problems with it have been just really
seems like it's getting at a tipping point.
It's definitely reached a tipping point.
Can I just say something in support of that? I just want to say, like, we decided not to use own voices as a category in our audit when we started at the very, like, before all this came out, simply because we felt if we could identify like an author's race or ethnicity, if they were, out loud about it, then we would include that, and we include that information in our audit. And we also include what their main characters identify as. And so in some ways you can see if it hits that stereotypical own voices mark just by sort of comparing the information. And so we thought that adding own voices was in some ways doubling up on the information. And so that's how we've kind of conceptualized that idea.
Yeah, and I just want to defend ourselves. I feel, it can be a real hot button issue, and we were very aware of this when We Need Diverse Books made their statement. We did discuss it, and the reason we are continuing to include it is that the problems around it seem very much more about the publishing industry capitalizing on it and using it, because we as librarians are trying to use this as a point to promote authors who are writing about an experience they know. We're not relying on the publisher to tell us that, and we're not using it in any way to out people. Again, it has to be the author identifying themselves as part of this group that they're writing about. But we felt like that the own voices experience is valuable enough that we wanted to continue to include it.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, there are definitely ethical concerns. We also touched a little bit on the idea of working around publications and materials that may not have positive or affirming representations of people. And, that's another thing we sort of have to deal with in terms of, quantifying these collections. I have a question from Robin. Hi, Robin. I'm curious, and sorry if I missed this in the conversation, but if you load electronic collections, either MARC or use API, is anyone auditing or monitoring those, Overdrive and Hoopla metadata, for example? Anyone want to speak to e-resources? Not to call you up, but Rachel, did you address those during your presentation earlier?
The records from vendors really don't have enough subject headings in them to be able to include them in a diversity audit dashboard. So all e-content has been completely removed from the data set.
That's right, you did say that. Has anybody else done any auditing work with e-resources, either separately or in concert with a print resource audit? Fair enough. Oh.
No, we haven't, but I will say the new Collection HQ module does do overdrive. So I haven't looked at it carefully, but they are tagging based on whatever they found in the record there.
Okay, that's good to know.
This is Joy from Tinley Park. I just recently conversed with our Collection HQ person, because we do subscribe to Collection HQ, but since we're part of a consortium, they would not be able to give us the data for just our patrons. It would be consortium wide, is the way that I understood it.
I see. Interesting. I don't recall. Ange, we took a look at that tool very briefly a couple nights ago, evenings ago. Do you recall what your numbers were looking like in that regard? With was that your collection, or was that the whole consortium?
I thought it was. I don't know the answer to that. That is a really good question. I'm hoping that maybe that's a question that the webinar that CHQ is putting on about it will answer. That's a good question. I don't remember.
Yeah, if it were the whole consortium, those numbers are especially low.
Yeah, I think in terms of items, physical items, I think it's got to be just our collection. I think it has to be.
It's just our collection specifically, I think.
Yeah, I don't know about the ebooks. I don't know, because ebooks would be the media on demand consortium. It might include all of those. I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, physical items, it's definitely just our collection.
Okay. Well, yeah, hopefully you'll find out more at the event. When is that webinar? And is that free for anybody to join, by the way?
I think it might just be for people who have CHQ.
Okay.
But they were doing a whole bunch. They had a whole bunch of listed times, and I'm just doing one tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
So, but I mean, I will definitely fill you in, Scott, on if I learn anything really exciting. But as we discovered the other day, the EDI data is incomplete at best in CHQ. I mean, incomplete is a nice way to say it.
Yes, that is what it seemed like. Don says, Oaklawn exporters their collection only from SWAN to Collection HQ, and transactional data is library specific in those exports from SWAN. Okay. Does that include ebooks? No. All right.
This is Robin. I was wondering if I could just chime in because
I'm sorry, somebody is speaking, but it's very muffled. Maybe get a bit closer to your mic. I'm sorry, I don't know who that was. Perhaps put your thoughts in the chat as well. That would probably work. We are at the 5-minute mark here. So I am just about ready to wrap up. Is there any last minute thoughts or anything that people wanted to just get out before we adjourn? I'm hoping this was useful to some people. And yeah, so we've done this, and yeah, there's been. I know I've taken a lot of ideas from this for a direction SWAN can go, or for some conversations that we can start having with our our compatriots in Illinois at the very least. This is also something that I'm hoping to do again someday, maybe half a year from now. We can check in on the projects that people have started. We'll have learned a lot by then. And so look out for that. We may make this sort of a semi-annual kind of regular thing for the time being. And I also really liked that idea of putting together some sort of what was the word? Networking group. So I'm going to sort of put some feelers out and see what might be possible in that arena. Or if there's one to just join, so I don't, to make the work a little easier. So thank you so much to our panelists from the pit of my stomach that formed in the days leading up to this thing. You've been amazing. Thank you everybody else for having amazing questions and for sharing your experiences. And I wish everybody a lovely remainder of the day, and that's just about it. A couple of people have put their email from the panel have put their emails into the chat. I imagine everybody is also available through L2. If you do want to follow up, maybe I shouldn't volunteer everybody for that, but well, too late. So thank you, and I hope y'all take care, and we'll talk soon.